All right. Hi there, everyone. This is Camille Harris, owner of Camille Coaching, and I'm here with Wendy Nelson, owner of Tiny Dog Strategies. And Wendy is a speech and language pathologist. It is an expert in dyslexia. And so, Wendy, why don't you tell me about what your background is and how you came to decide to work with people that have dyslexia?
Sure. So I diagnose and treat dyslexia, and in my prior life, I taught English as a second language to international students. So I've always loved teaching. And when I decided to become a speech language pathologist, I completed a fellowship with the Winston Center over in Spokane. They specialize in ADHD and dyslexia. And I found that I just really enjoyed working with that population. I could draw on my teaching background and my love of language. And so then when I moved back over here to Everett, I discovered that there were no specialty clinics for dyslexia in this area. So I decided I better open one.
Yes, I'm so glad that you did. Because I know you're going to talk about this, but one of the reasons I wanted to do this interview with you is I've learned, and I've continued to see this out in my everyday life, is that 1 in 5 people have dyslexia. That's a huge percentage of the population.
It is.
That is grossly underserved.
Yes.
So I know one thing you have mentioned to me before is that there's to my knowledge, there's still no other clinics like yours that specialize in addressing dyslexia. Is that right?
Right. As far as I know, between about Bellingham and Seattle, I am it.
You're it. You're one-man show.
Pretty much.
One-man show. Yeah. Well, can you describe what dyslexia is? I gave the percentage, it's 1 in 5, but tell us what dyslexia is.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a neurological learning difference, and some people do refer to it as a learning disorder. I prefer to think of it as a learning difference because it's not that there's anything wrong with the dyslexic brain, it's just processing the information differently. So in a nutshell, if you look at an MRI, when someone with dyslexia is reading, you'll notice that the right side of their brain is lighting up a lot more. And someone without dyslexia, it's usually the left side of the brain, which is where the language centers are. So that's the basic difference, is that people with dyslexia are just using an area of their brain that's not specially designed to process language.
So is it a hereditary thing?
Very often it is. Yeah, it does tend to run in families.
Yeah. So, and a statistic I've heard is if a parent has dyslexia, then the child has a 50% chance of having it.
Right.
And if both parents have it, the child has just about a 100% chance of having it.
Pretty much. Yep, that's what I heard.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things I'm noticing in my work is that oftentimes when a child is diagnosed in today's day and age, 20, 30, 40 years ago, they weren't able to diagnose as readily. And so a lot of times what's happening now is the parents are learning when their children are getting diagnosed. Oh, I've always struggled with reading and writing. I think I have dyslexia.
Yeah, I see that a lot with parents who come in and they're getting a diagnosis for their child, and as we're discussing the results and the different characteristics, the parent will start to have this kind of light bulb moment of, oh, that's what's going on with me too. I must have this as well. Right.
Well, explain, what are some common indicators in school age, middle school, and high school of dyslexia? Mm-hmm. The really common things that people can look for.
Well, with young kids, you would look for things like trouble with rhyming, not being able to recognize that words begin or end with the same letter, not connecting letters with the sounds that they make. When they're trying to read a story, they're relying mostly on the pictures rather than the words to figure out what's going on in the story. As kids get older, they will start to try to avoid reading, especially reading aloud in school, because they're not comfortable with that skill. They will rarely read for pleasure. They're going to do other things anytime instead of reading. And reading is just going to require great effort for them as they get older. They'll really struggle with it. But in addition to all those difficulties, there are some strengths that tend to go along with dyslexia. You'll notice that kids with dyslexia tend to be more creative. They are really good at problem solving, out-of-the-box thinking. And they're good at just kind of figuring things out on their own without needing to read the instructions, since that's a challenge for them.
Yeah. Well, and you had mentioned before how their right side of the brains light up, but the left side of the brain is where most reading and writing happens. And so these kids that are neurologically different, diverse, they learn, their brains just activate, from what I understand, more of their brain than people that don't have dyslexia, because they have to. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So my son, as you know, my son has dyslexia, and some of those indicators you had mentioned, in fact, all of those indicators you mentioned, he had. And before I knew he had dyslexia, it was really easy for me to just, I mean, my intuition was screaming, like, something's off here, something's off here, something's off here. But but I wanted to believe, oh, well, he's just late with rhyming, and oh, he's looking at the pictures because he prefers pictures instead of reading. You know, he had all of those things. And so what would you say to a parent who sees those things, but doesn't really know what to do with that?
I would say, number one, trust your instinct. As a parent, you know your child better than anyone else, than the schools, than the doctors, anybody. And don't let the schools tell you to wait and see. Because really what that means is we're waiting for this child to fail before we help them.
Yeah. Well, and one thing I know too is it's really common for kids that have a neurological difference to have more than one. Oftentimes there's co-occurrences. So other neurological differences are ADHD, autism. So do you see that in your work with kids, that oftentimes they have other co-occurring disorders?
I do, yeah. About half of the kids with ADHD also have dyslexia.
Yeah.
So a lot of the kids who come to see me for their dyslexia are also dealing with ADHD.
Which, that was just like fascinating to me when I learned that, but it makes total sense because neurologically diverse, right?
Right. Well, and if you can't focus on the words on the page, you're not going to be successful reading them.
Right, right. And ADHD, it makes it difficult to focus.
Mm-hmm.
I've come across so many families in my work that have children that have dyslexia and or ADHD. I don't think I've told you this. I'm actually going to be starting group parenting classes exclusively for families that have ADHD, so that there's like a support system in place.
That's great.
In addition to the parenting classes, because it's hard. It's different parenting kids that have dyslexia and ADHD. It's just harder. That's all there is to it. And so I'm really excited about that, to just provide that additional support system for those families and give them some tools to parent these children that are neurologically diverse.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, that's going to be great.
So can you tell me, how is someone diagnosed and treated for dyslexia? And then talk about why I know you use the Wilson method, and how does that work to support people? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The diagnosis consists of obtaining some background information from the parents, and then what I do is conduct a couple of different assessment tools that I use. One is the Wechsler, I have to think of what the acronym stands for, WIAT, Wechsler Individual Achievement Test. Okay. And then I also use what's called the CTOP, the Comprehensive Test of Phonological Processing. And those two tests together, along with background information, allow me to make a pretty definitive diagnosis as to whether or not someone has dyslexia. That diagnosis can also be completed by a neuropsychologist or neuropsychiatrist, and they'll do a little bit more extensive testing than I can do. But either one of us can diagnose dyslexia. And then for the treatment, it's got to be systematic, sequential, and multisensory. Those are the keys to any successful dyslexia treatment. There is what's called the Orton-Gillingham approach, which is considered the gold standard, and there are lots of different programs that fall under that approach. Wilson Reading System is one of them. And it's the one that I use for the most part, where we start with very simple words, words like cat, bat, that just have a consonant, a short vowel, and a consonant. And then we build up from there and learn about the different syllable types and the different sounds that letters can make in our language.
Yeah. So thank you for explaining that. Moving backwards from all you just said, I can say my son, who has been working with you, we have seen tremendous growth in his ability to read and write. And one thing I don't think we've mentioned yet is that oftentimes dyslexia, it's a reading difference. However, it can impact writing as well.
Yes.
So with him, explain, this is fascinating to me. Explain how when you do the Wilson method, whatever magic you work, the rewiring of the brain. Explain, because you gave me a beautiful analogy of that before.
Yeah.
Loved it.
So basically, because in a dyslexic brain, they're using the right side of the brain instead of the left side, we want to try to shift that over and get the language processing into the area of the brain that's designed for it. And so it's kind of like if you're walking across a field of grass and you walk across in the same place over and over and over for a period of weeks, you will eventually wear a path in the grass. We can do that with the brain. Through repetition, through doing the same skill over and over and over again, we can actually rewire the brain and get the processing into the area of the brain where it needs to be.
So fascinating.
It's incredible that we can do that, that the brain is plastic enough to make that happen.
Neuroplasticity. Yeah, the brain has neuroplasticity. So dyslexia isn't curable. So by default, people with dyslexia, from what I understand, are going to always start with their right brain, but after they work with you or someone who does your methods of magic with dyslexia, they're going to get those paths. So they'll immediately go to the right, but then they'll get the paths to default to the left. So reading won't be as difficult for them.
Right. Well, yeah, you use the word curable. The thing about dyslexia is it's not a disease. We're not curing anything because there's nothing to cure.
We can't make it go away.
Yeah. No, people with dyslexia will always be dyslexic, but they can learn these different strategies and their brain can help them to compensate for their difficulties.
Right, their difficulties. So, and before you had mentioned that you can diagnose dyslexia, and the benefit of also seeing a neuropsychologist or neuropsychiatrist is that if there are other co-occurring disorders, differences such as ADD, ADHD, autism, anything like that, or anything else, really, anxiety, depression, they can identify those things.
Exactly.
However, as you know, they have a pretty long wait list getting in to see these specialists. So there's a benefit to getting evaluated with you first, and then getting going on the treatment or the work you do, and then moving forward with those other assessments. And I have links on my website to 2 really good providers for those neuropsychological evaluations that I can share with people.
Good. Yeah, because I can jump right in and start treating the dyslexia. And then the rest, you get on the wait list and you get it diagnosed when you can. Right. The benefit to seeing a neuropsych is that later on, when kids are gearing up for things like the SAT or wanting to get accommodations in college courses, they will need that diagnosis from the neuropsych.
Great. Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. So how well do you feel like public schools are equipped to support students with dyslexia in Washington State?
Well, just as a disclaimer, I should say that I have not worked in the public schools. So my information comes from parents and from what I've read. But my understanding is that the public schools in this state are not equipped to handle dyslexia. A large part of that is because our teacher training programs are not addressing dyslexia. When people go to school to become a teacher, they don't learn about dyslexia. They're not learning about the science of reading. So then they get in the classrooms and they're not sure how to address it or even how to recognize it.
Right. That's what I've heard too, over and over again from educators, is that they just don't know. They don't know what they don't know. They may know that this child is falling behind. They may know that this child is not picking up certain concepts with reading and writing, but they don't know what to look for. So I do know that in Washington State, there's legislation that passed requiring early education screening for dyslexia starting next school year in 2020.
Right.
So do you have any recommendations for how to start that process?
Well, the number one thing I think is to educate the teachers and get them involved at the earliest possible stage so that they can learn what they need to know. Other than that, I know there is an advisory council that's working on this for the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction, the OSPI. And it's a really great group of people. I know some of them who are involved in that, and they know their stuff. So they are in the process of determining what are going to be the best tools to use in the schools.
And parents, they can educate the teachers too, right? If they get this information, they can share it. I know that with my son, his teacher just didn't know. She didn't know, and that was no fault of her own, but the more information I gave her, and I know you gave her, she met us where we're at, and she was so, knowledge is power, right?
Yes.
And so she, a lot of times I think teachers just appreciate knowing more about your child because you're the expert on your child.
Yeah, and parents have to be the number one advocates for their kids.
Yes, yeah. And I think oftentimes they just kind of, no fault of their own, just, well, the teachers knows best and no news is good news. And, but yeah, always be the expert of your child and trust your intuition, like you said in the beginning.
Yes.
So what would you recommend a parent do if they're concerned that their child might have dyslexia? What's the next step?
Next step is to start educating yourself and get an appointment with a neuropsych or an SLP for that diagnosis. There are some great websites out there. The International Dyslexia Association has wonderful resources. Every state has their own branch of that organization as well. There are some really good Facebook groups. There's the Decoding Dyslexia Facebook group. Again, every state has their own group for that. And just learn as much as you possibly can. Do some reading. Sally Shaywitz has a great book called Overcoming Dyslexia. There's a lot of resources out there, but you are going to need to do the work yourself.
I don't know about the Decoding Dyslexia one. I'm not looking at that.
Yeah, that's a great Facebook group.
Okay. And if you're in our area, and okay, step back real quick. I'm on some of those Facebook groups, and they are wonderfully helpful on just learning indicators, just a lot of support, a lot of education. I don't feel like they're negative groups. I feel like they're really uplifting, really positive. People, of course, people come with concerns they have or experiences that were difficult for their family or their child, but there's so much support there from other families. So just want to put that out there. So if you're in our area, which we're in Snohomish County, people can contact you to get a free assessment, correct?
I do
screening.
Yeah, and it takes about 20 minutes, and basically at the end of that 20 minutes, I can tell you whether or not your child is at risk of dyslexia.
Yeah. Okay. So I will share below your contact information, how people can get in touch with you. Also a link to my website where they can get in touch with my recommended neuropsychologist and psychologist. And I think that a few of those resources you're listed too. So anything else you want to share?
Trust yourself, trust that you know your kid, and there's nothing wrong with your child just because they have dyslexia. It's just a different way of learning.
Different way of learning. Yeah. And my last tidbit is I know that people that have dyslexia, something that comes with that is resilience.
Yes.
Just because you have to function in a world that is so heavily based on written communication. That's just the world we live in. And so people with dyslexia resilient. They're very resilient humans. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for your time so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Camilla. I enjoyed it.
Okay, bye.